welcome to this new episode of the mini-series Affectively. And in this new episode, I have my colleague Tomomi Sasaki, who's going to be supporting with her knowledge and experience, getting a bit more practical, I think, in this episode. Let's see where we land. So Tomomi is a colleague of mine at Greater Than. Lots of experience, but I think that it's better if she, or if you, Tomomi, introduce yourself with your own words, with something, we could learn about you, get to know about you.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia, and thank you for inviting me to talk about Greater Than and also Emotions at Work, which is a group coaching program that I run with my friend Ariana Lavilla. I'm a designer by trade, working mostly in digital contexts, and have been in client services most of my life, which means that I have done a lot of workshops and kind of built up my facilitation skills there. And then in that process, what I found was that as the stakes grew higher and higher, it was really important to better understand the human dynamics of what was going on in the room. And that's where I really started to pay more attention to things like power and emotions and what's really driving people, not just, whatever business or product thing that we were discussing in the room. And so a few years ago I got my coach training and have been on that path since, and at Greater Than, where I've been for about almost 3 years, I think. Very happy to be an associate there and working on instrumentation for self-organization.
Thank you for that intro, Tomomi. You already revealed the reason why we're having a conversation.
I did.
Tomomi is always a great conversation partner, but she's also running this program, Emotions at Work, and I would like to know more about it and your motivation about starting it. And I'm very curious about the things that you have learned. But before going there, you already mentioned something super interesting in your intro about as the stakes were getting higher and higher, it was more important to understand the human element. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, in a high stakes workshop, I think there's a lot of emotions like fear and anger that are not expressed as such. They come out in different ways. And if we're in the role of holding space for that conversation, we need to be able to see what's going on and adapt accordingly, or be prepared, or help people bring that out in a way that is not harmful to the rest or even to themselves, and find ways to channel this energy into something that's more productive. And they don't teach you that in design. There's not a posted exercise that you can do about that. And so, that's really where it was very clear to me the gap of what's needed as a facilitator. But I think also if you're on the side of the one having those emotions, working on your ability to process them, to recognize and process them and express them in ways that are conducive to why you're there and why the group is there, is a skill that most of us are not taught actually at any point in life.
Yeah, that maybe I'm derailing a bit now, but it reminds me we're having a workshop yesterday with Miriam, and one of the exercises that she proposed was the 4 levels of listening, of theory, and in the 4th one, and I think that's a nice. So I understand that this emotional work, that it was something you were doing so that you could be together with the group and support the group in achieving their goals, and I think that's a skill, I think, that is very needed in facilitation, or especially maybe, I don't know, hosting, in a way that you're not, just directing people to a very specific goal, but you're also allowing things to happen, and you use that to get to the purpose to the, let's say, overarching goal of the workshop. And I think, I don't know, it just made me think that it's very similar to this fourth layer of listening in theory U, in which you're very open to whatever comes, and you're aware of your triggers, and you're aware of the emotions that you're dealing with, and you have to work with that in order to be able to move forward in the situation and express it or not in a way, in the other. And yeah, and I always like to say that it takes a lot. How is it? I think I usually say hosting has a lot to do with you, so that it has the least to do with you possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know? It's like
yes,
that you really have. Sometimes, if it works well, people think, "Oh, nothing happened," right? Or that nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like we did the workshop, and it's like, "Oh, the facilitator, she was there, but it was not, this presence that some facilitators have. That's like very intense." But I think that's when the magic happens, and the group is flowing, and you're able to intervene in the moments that are necessary, and they take so much emotional work. After some sessions, I'm actually quite exhausted. And the reason I'm saying this is that I think this is a basic skill for self-organizing.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I love that you use the word magic, because I gave examples of emotions like anger and frustration and fear, but it's also joy and excitement and like just the different energies that are in the room, and we can capitalize on these. Like these are the ones that we want to amplify, and when it's working well, it is like magic, absolutely. Yeah, and I think when I first realized this, and this was quite some while ago, and I realized this was like the capability gap, I think I really resented it, because it means like you have to work on yourself, and I'm like, that is what I need to do to become a better facilitator. Um, yeah, and it's like I was just not really willing to do that in that moment. But yeah, at some point I got over it and thought that is the needed step, not just professionally, but also personally. Like it'll change the way that I show up in my relationships, like in any aspect of life. And if that's not worth doing that for, then what is? And so, yeah, to your point, to connect it to self-organizing. And as we both know, there's so much personal development involved in being able to thrive in these environments. I think that's where it really meshes well together. Like you have to be willing to do this kind of work, or you're not going to get very far, I think, in self-organized environments.
Yeah, I think that it's maybe you have a more elaborate way of saying this, but once you're in an environment that is self-organized, and we say, okay, we change the power dynamics from power over to power with, it opens up to a new way of being that we haven't really been taught, that maybe we're lucky we have in some very specific relationships in our life, but maybe we don't. And that this requires a lot of, I think, emotional maturity for it to work properly and be able to put the topics on the table. And also, I think there's something about once you're in a hierarchical relationship, that, there's someone, let's say, feedbacking you, or, like orienting a little bit towards how we want to be and all of that. And when you're in this self-organized setting, and I did this, but I don't mean completely horizontal.
It's more like that.
It's more like that.
Yeah.
That it's, in what grounds do you do that, and how do you do that, and is it you or is it the other one? So there's a lot of thinking that goes into that, or feeling as well. But let's Let's go first to emotions at work. That's the reason why I asked you to do this interview, because I think that, well, I'm doing academic research, so it's very abstract. I'm looking for ways of landing it a little bit, but you're already doing something that is practice-based. And I wanted to, ask you what is that you're doing. But let's maybe start from the beginning, why you started it. So you have given some hints, but I'm sure there are more elements to the story. Why did you start Emotions at Work? What do you want to achieve with it? And if you can give us a bit of a flavor, what is that you're doing there?
Yeah, thank you. And it's been fascinating for you to think that what I'm doing is practice and then what you're doing is more theoretical. I think I'm so much in the practice that it's been interesting to think, like, try to understand what is it that you see. And I'm really enjoying the process of trying to find the links between our work, of which there are a lot. But we use different language and activities. And so, yeah, it's like kind of finding where the crossroads are. Emotions at Work started as a curiosity of what happens, like what's possible when we have access to spaces where we're in conversation about the emotions at work. Emotions at work in an active way, and then in the workplace, because that's our primary interest. Like, of course, we have emotions in all aspects of life, but the workplace is where it seems to be like very underdeveloped, and so that's our focus. And so, yeah, it's a small group that gets together every other week for 5 sessions, and each session we have a theme, and we usually choose depending on what the group is interested in, but typically around topics like trust, saying no, difficult conversations, confidence, declaring your intentions, coordinating how to coordinate work by making requests. Um, and we offer like a little bit of theory and then have a lot of activities that help everybody better understand the concept, relate it to what they're going through, and then using the work experiences that we've had and also are currently facing as material to look at it from a different perspective. And what we want to achieve is for more professionals, I think, especially managers and leaders, to have access to this kind of learning. And I think it can only happen in group environments. We have to interact with other humans, but it doesn't necessarily need to be with your colleague per se. It can be with a fellow professional where you have no relationship other than this mutual commitment to learn together. And by being like practicing how to have conversations around these topics and better name your emotions and to identify like how they're coming up and like how it's affecting your behavior, we learn to see ourselves differently and then learn to see others differently. And so maybe somebody in the group, based on say a role playing activity, it offers you a perspective that you've just never thought about before in relation to a colleague that maybe you don't get along with, or usually it's more these difficult cases. And that insight, like that new perspective, helps you recognize that you have way more choice than you realize. I think that's the feedback, or like what I hear from the people who go through the program, is something they realize, and that is fascinating. I think you mentioned to me a few weeks ago that this kind of thing, like once people try it, it's very obvious the value and like why it's important. Because we all have emotions and we know like intuitively how they affect us. And yet somehow there's this gap, usually more like intellectual gap, of why we don't tend to them. We push them aside, we reject them, we pretend they don't exist, or we're like, no, it's work, so it should be like this. Um, And yet we are so emotionally invested in our work, but we don't really do much with that emotion. It's like just getting put into the work. And so, yeah, uh, coming back to emotions at work, that group space is a way to process what it is we're seeing, and then practice different ways that maybe we want to behave differently, to have a better chance of achieving the result that you want.
Cool. Thank you for that overview. This goes very much in coherence with what you said about doing this in group environments. In the previous episode, I was with two people from Deep Adaptation Forum, and they had a decolonizing circle practice. And they were saying, it's peeling onions. And that's actually how you learn in this setting. It's more the actual or more true way of learning, especially in power with environments in which, someone is maybe giving you a little bit of input to understand something better or differently. It's an impulse that you get, but then peeling the onion and doing that work with yourself, with others. And I think that's the beauty of the group. It's things that you can reflect on your own, but there are levels that you can only reach with others, hearing their context, examples, and that's just so valuable also to know that you're not alone feeling all that.
I appreciate this peeling metaphor. One thing that drives me in my coaching practice after having thought about it, like being asked, like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? It's that I want us, like whoever wants to be on this journey, to be able to hear the signals like from within. I think we're so social, and I say we, but like, of course, it's me, right? Like, most of us doing this thing is like, it's something you're trying to change about yourself, and along that way, we find others to be on that journey with. But yeah, like as a Japanese female, I'm very socially conditioned to dampen how I'm feeling, and also have a over like heightened sense of what other people are thinking. And so that signal is so strong, and like my ability to catch it is so strong that the balance then with what's happening in me is much harder to grasp. Like the signal is so weak. And to me, there's the learning process is really being able to kind of detect and actually listen to it, and also take it seriously. And I think that's really where the peeling happens. The layers that we're trying to kind of get below.
Yeah, there's so much of it, and I don't know, I always get emotional thinking about it, like so much social conditioning around us not being able to connect, or as you're saying that, it's my emotions. Oh, they're not important. You're attuned to everyone else's, and at the end, you don't even know, okay, what's the signal anymore, or you hear it, but just ignore it for a while longer.
Yes. Yeah, that's something that I keep learning again and again in this program, as well as like how unskilled we are at recognizing the emotions that we're feeling. Like we recognize the expressions of it, but maybe only a couple.
Yeah.
And there's so much power in being able to differentiate between different emotions, because then you really understand what's driving it, like what's the impulse.
Can you say more about that? So is it understanding the emotion lets you understand better the situation, or why you're feeling that and what needs to happen after, or doing something else?
Yeah. Like each emotion is, when you feel it, it's a data point about something that is like it's a reaction in relation to your values, right? And so, like, if we're angry at something, it's because we feel there's injustice in the world. And so then we can look at, like, what is it that I'm feeling that injustice towards? And then you can, like, building upon that actually gives us this propelling energy that can be really, like, beautiful and powerful. But if we're taught that anger is something that needs to be pressed down or not expressed, and we don't take that moment to try to dig into what's behind that, like, we lose that. And then it just lives in our body and it just stays there. Like, it doesn't get processed. Yeah, so that's one example. One thing that Oriana and I tried to do ourselves as well is, put the things that we're trying to convey into the practice as we build the program. Because it's still about 2 years, like quite early days, I would say. And one thing we did a few months ago was ask ourselves, we had like a blue sky session of what we wanted emotions at work to become. And we kind of had a list of goals and such, like you do, right? There's a Google Doc and there's a list. And but we said, wait a minute, like, let's use emotions as, the modality to think about this. And then identified how, like, what is the emotion we want to be feeling when we are doing this work. And so some of the things we chose were like bold. That's not an emotion that's very accessible to me. Like, often I am confident, but not particularly bold. I am more careful. Like, I can be very timid. And so by being very specific about these emotions, these words, and talking about them, the difference. I want to feel joyful. I want to feel proud. That just puts so much color into the way that we think about what we're doing, right? Because the goal is not, some numerical figure or some fame or whatever. Like, that's not, we can, make up some goal like that, but yeah, that's not going to be like why I get up in the morning and do that instead of something else. But by connecting to the emotion that we wanted to feel, and maybe what is it we're feeling now, and like what's blocking, and just putting that in the center of the discussion just opened up so many ideas. And like, I could just feel, the body and the mind opening up to different ideas in a way that feels really generative and creative. And it feels like being able to tap into that is like just the beginning of what's possible.
Yeah, I love that. And what a great question. I will put it on a post-it. And what are the emotions we want to be feeling while doing this work? This is such a good question. So important for even like health and self-care, and that we often think about, the amount of hours we want to work,
right,
projects we want to do. And it's true. I know I have stopped working with certain clients because it didn't feel good, but it's like I never ask myself, what are the emotions I want to feel?
That you want to feel, yeah. We're very clear about the ones we don't want to feel.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and then, like, I think there are only so many emotions that are present for us in terms of words, right? Like, we all say we want to be happy, we want to be excited. But if I say I want to feel joyful, or if I want to feel proud or like ecstatic, it's like, oh, that's different. Like, what is that difference? Because in that gap between those, those different emotions, of course, there's an overlap. But there's so much nuance there, and that richness, I think, is where actually there's that like that's the potential that's untapped.
Yeah, and talking about potential in this connection you were talking about, mind and body, I wanted to go to the framing that you use in emotions at work. If I'm not wrong, you use these 3 circles that interconnect, and one is body, one is emotion, and one is language. Can you talk a bit about that model and how you use it and how you see the intersection, and again this feeling of what's possible if you work in that center?
In those three, yeah. This is called the Bell model and is the foundational model of the Newfield network, which is where Oriana and I trained. It's an ontological model, so it's like kind of identifying how you want to see the world, or in this case, yourself and other people, and saying that these 3 are equally important. And in kind of our modern world, I guess, the language piece tends to get the most attention. The body piece, I think, is slowly becoming mainstream. I think in our circles, that's something that we should pay attention to, and is also this like untapped, of like how we're not floating heads above our bodies, right? Um, yeah, this is also the unlearning that most of us are going through, and learning how to, like, what does it actually mean to be embodied. Yeah, so that's one, not just in terms of sensing, but also shaping. And so we can put our body in different dispositions that will make it more likely that there's a certain, posture and energy that we take when going into something. Also learning how to better tune our bodies so that it's more straightforward to stay grounded or to sense what's going on. Yeah, so that's body, and then emotions is the third, and is in a way most difficult for a lot of us. It certainly is for me. That's why it seemed the most kind of worthy to pursue. And in the Bell model, the way Newfield teaches it, it's the coherence between these 3 things that allows us to act differently, which is then what gets us the results that we want. Imagine sometimes like you see somebody saying something, or even ourselves, we say something, but if it's not embodied, like you can tell they don't really mean it. Like people can tell, I think. Like we're very sensitive that way. And that's because the body is in play, kind of our spider senses. Like, yeah, you're saying all the right things, but I don't believe you. But yeah, when these 3, circles all work in coherence, that's really where the that sense of solidness, that weight. It's like we can go about our work in a different way. Like we're more present. We show up in a way where people respond more than when you sense that kind of, it's like you're not sure where they're coming from. I think is the sense that I tend to get when somebody is maybe lacking that coherence in something they're doing that they don't really believe in.
Yeah, I think that's one of the pieces, let's say, where our work intersects, that this is, let's say, a model that you can practice. And what I have to look at as a part of, let's say, the theoretical framework, which sounds super obvious again, but it's like we don't do any of that. So the whole organizational theory is based on us being floating heads in a way, and how important it is, or there's a lot of feminist theory just explaining that, it's very important that we take into account our bodies, because the consequences that it has is that, well, if not, what happens is that we take for granted that there is a sort of standard body, and of course it's a male body, it's a white body, it's a like maximum middle age, middle class, all of that. And by acknowledging that we have bodies, then we can change that. And we can act also in a different way. And as you say, I find that very interesting, that although there are all of these, let's say we have this societal buildup that we have, people are still very sensitive to these things. Like we have kept, I don't know if it's a lot because I don't know what was there before, but there's still sensing capabilities that are there to, feel discoherence or incoherence or ask something's off. So it's still, in a way, very present, or you can be very present if we work on it. But it's difficult in systems that keep reminding us or keep telling, no, you're a floating head. No, you're a floating head, right? And if we do anything is sort of very controlled. I don't want to criticize mindfulness, but if that's the only thing that you do, and feeling your body and all of that, or just introducing mindfulness and yoga in the organization, you're not changing anything else. Right? I mean, there's only so much that you can do. You're still getting reminded indirectly that you're a floating head. So yeah, I do find that intersection, very interesting, and something to apply as much as possible in our work as well as we can as organizations. That yes, we talk, but again, there's a lot more.
Yeah, this is something I find really beautiful, being part of greater than and having more exposure to others, like self-organizing context, is that there are many people there who have been practicing that a lot longer than you. I mean, it's relative, but when somebody is showing up in this different way, it's been my experience that it kind of pulls that behavior out of myself as well. Because they're different, I'm different. And somehow in this self-organized context, there's a concentration of that. So it's more likely that more of us will show up in that way. And so I find myself saying things and having different ideas because other people are more like that. And then if I'm with other people who are, maybe not like that, like I'm also less likely to be like that. I think the practice is then I try to, be the person who shows up differently. And so like all that ripple effect that's happening is fascinating, and like that's so valuable. It's not you read it in a book about how to design organizations and experiment, or you come up with some almighty framework and suddenly everyone's convinced of this and that. And yeah, so that's where I see, I think, the overlap with your research, and then the group and intentional practices that we have in common.
I think that maybe that's the point about this intersection and the coherence with it, and this different way of showing up, which is, it's still, I find it very difficult to pin down, like how is it? Like how can you describe that? No, it's like when you see it and you live it, then you recognize it,
right?
And as you say, someone, it awakens it up in you, right? But I find very difficult to
totally.
I wouldn't know how to do that. I'm not asking you to do it. If you have find a way, great. Don't worry, it's not a tricky question. What I was wondering was more, I'm very interested in these things that we as a society or in organizations, and I'm aware I'm the one who's like bring the abstract level all the time and actually want to go to practice. But I think that's quite important, because when we go into practice, then we take methodologies that we have seen, or things that are in the surface. And now, for example, I'm talking about, and although I do love the framework, but I have seen in NGOs specifically, or other like big organizations, right? It's easier for them to say, oh, we implement a framework or a methodology, and then people just show up in this way, or they talk in this way. So for example, it would be a nonviolent communication, which I have found that it's a sort of, I would assume it's a sort of language, like a language used to communicate with each other. And there's theoretically a big reflection part that needs to happen for you in order to engage in nonviolent communication. But what I have found is when people apply just the methodology, without really doing the work, it's like it's just such a toxic. So before I was trying to understand what is it, what do we have to change, like what is this happening? And now when I see something like this, is just run. Like you don't want to be there. But yeah, this makes me think the conversation we were having again about this. Yes, you can use one of these, let's say, layers or circles, but there's a coherence needed in all of them. I guess there's something overarching that maybe is the intention that you have and with what purpose you do things, but you cannot just take one and pretend that it's going to work. And I don't want to say anything about.
If only it were that easy, right?
Yeah.
People always find a way. Yeah, I'm not super familiar or have been like up close to groups that practice nonviolent communication. But what I always think is that yes, it's the coherence, and then maybe like my cultural background, which is like you listen for what's not being said.
Mm-hmm.
And I find a lot of like communication based methodologies about what you say and how to say it, which is great, but also like what is your relationship to that person? What are they not saying? Why did they say it in this moment and not that moment? Like who else was in the room? These are factors, like that's kind of my social conditioning, right? Like in Japan, it's like almost a survival skill to know how to read the room, like to read between the lines. And so when we talk about being able to express your needs, which is usually your needs as an individual, it's a bit where I struggle a little bit in fully accepting this, because I don't really fully understand, like, what about the needs of the group, and what about the needs that are not being expressed, not so much because that person is not able to, but because maybe it shouldn't need to be expressed. I don't know. But like, there's like just so much outside of kind of the word-based protocols on how to express and how to receive the words that I feel is where the challenges are. And when these methodologies don't work, it's kind of like the rest of the stuff that's not being tended to. Yeah, so what's not being said, and also the relationships, and I think also things like the identity of the group can't just cram a methodology if that's not the reason the group is there. There are also things like life stage, and whoever is the core or like most active or the most powerful within the group, there's also where they are in their life, and maybe that's just not what they want to be doing at that moment, even if they think they should. And so I don't know. It's like we're very good at fooling ourselves into thinking we should be in a certain way, and I think that's where it gets tripped up. And being very specific then on the protocols doesn't really help with that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Because in the research, I have a look at what is called feeling rules. So theoretically, how you're supposed to show up in an organizational setting. And that's where maybe I would really like to see how, to understand how you see it. Because I'm having a look at self-organizing, or let's say affect within self-organizing, because self-organizing is a place that has a very different set of power dynamics in its design. And so it allows theoretically for many different things, emotional expressions and all of that. Actually, or if I'm not mistaken, you work also with people that work in hierarchical organizations, big or small, whatever. But so the thing that feeling rules says is that well, there are these ways of expressing that are accepted, and also they are biased by Western culture. So usually we expect people to show up in a calm way, in a friendly way, or camaraderie with colleagues. And of course, these comes from, again, this prototype or like this understanding of the standard of being a man, middle-aged, middle class, and everyone else who doesn't fit in here might not be represented, or will definitely not be represented, of course. And then, of course, that anger, for example, can be shown in certain contexts, but especially if you're a man, and if you're not, then, well, you have, the hysterical woman or the whatever other, let's say, ways of naming that we have for that. So I'm wondering, what is it that or how you see the potential of emotions at work in, let's say, power over, even if they are collaborative, but at the end of the day, there's a hierarchy context in which we know from the research that these feeling rules exist in one way or the other. Like maybe it's more strong, maybe it's stronger, maybe it's weaker, but they are there in a way. There's certain expectations, exactly. It was the word I was looking for. Expectation. How is it that you're going to be expressing yourself, relating with colleagues and all that?
Yeah, I don't really differentiate between self-organized or not. And the emotional piece to build, it's your skill no matter where you go. And the way I see different types of organizations or different environments, it is mostly cultural. And so, I could go to a self-organized place, but I could go to another, like a different self-organized entity, and I would still have, like, there would still be that learning curve in terms of what's expected or not. And so, yeah, to me, kind of, there's not really two camps. There's just different ways of organizing. And as a newcomer, there is the work of observing how that system operates and how you want to position yourself and kind of interact with people. I think there's a skill in you showing up in specific ways, and there's a skill in understanding how people perceive you. Like, it matters who you are, but it also matters what people think you are. And what I found is that this is a given in more conventional organizations because you're hired for specific roles. Like, people think you're that, or they see your attributes, like gender or whatever, and like they just kind of assume that you're that. And it's just kind of already there. Whereas in self-organized context, I think the assumption is that that's kind of more flat, and that you know how to like express yourself in a way that is not particularly tied to any of these things, but we don't always know. But I'm not sure if this is making any sense. But I find that in self-organized context, the role, like, I find the people who struggle in self-organized context are kind of missing that part, thinking about how the system is reacting to them or how you're being perceived within the system, which is something you, in a conventional organization, you just naturally think of because it's more of this machine.
Because there's a position or role that is already has attributes of that, what you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
There's a certain expectation. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting. I feel like I did not answer your question though, which was potential of emotions at work for self-organized context. Yeah, I think it's the same as in any context. This is more of a human skill that I would like society to cultivate.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's a level or layer I hadn't thought about, because I'm having more a look at maybe the sociological aspect of it. So when you're in the group, like what is allowed and what's not allowed. And for example, not yet, at least not having a look at identity, but of course that has also an impact on how your identity develops and all of that. So yeah, so I guess I was wondering how you see that. So emotions at work being applied in settings in which there is maybe a prettier or less prettier box, but that's like the expectations that people have of you, how you're going to express yourself. That's, as you were saying, like, or I understood you were saying, much more defined than if you are in a self-organized setting. And you're saying, it's apart from the setting itself, it's a skill that people have, and of course that's useful anyway. So that does
people have and can be developed. I think this is what's interesting, and maybe something and I mean like very generally us working in these spaces are not communicating or articulating enough, is that this can be developed. We also have to practice it, or it kind of, goes down in a way. It's not like we do something once and then you have it for the rest of your life. Kind of have to keep working on it, and that it's worth it. I think this is another, like, a learning from doing the program. It's something I've heard from our clients, is it's like, in your head that showing up differently, like being authentic and vulnerable, is kind of what you're supposed to do. And then throughout the experience of doing that, because that's what the group is for, you're reminded over and over again, like, that it's worth it.
So being in the group itself, you're reminded that it's worth it.
I think we all know in theory that it's worth it, but somehow it doesn't compute to the level of, like, this is something I'm going to commit to. Like, this is the thing that might change, something for me professionally. It's like, we know it, but it's not fully clicking. And one of our challenges is to, like, find the words to convey that. And I feel I'm quite far from that, fortunately. But, like, that I do see as the challenge, because as you were saying earlier, the ideas, like, are not that complicated. Like, it feels really basic, and yet we don't do them. So it's like, what is that all about?
I was writing down, okay, what are the learnings that are coming up during our discussion from the program of emotions at work? And I have written down that on the one hand, there is this new perspective that it gives you, or it gives people that are in the program, have gone through the process, it gives them more choice, sense that they have more options. Then you said recently that there is a shared, so being together in doing this work and reflecting together, it gives people, I guess it's like a encouragement, in a way, understanding that showing up differently is worth it. It's like we know it, but doing a process with peers, it helps you reinforce that, and probably then keep doing that. Exactly. And then you were saying something, I think, also as a learning, I understand, would be this coherence between the three levels, so language, body, and emotions. Is there anything else that, well, maybe you have mentioned and I have not recorded it, or anything that you say, oh, well, this has been a learning by running the program, something that you have experienced, all the participants have?
Well, one thing I learn over and over and again is how powerful this all is. It's quite fascinating to me. Like, it's astounding to me that this is the lesson that I keep learning, with the group. And it really blows my mind of how powerful it is. And I think I also need this reminder, right? Like, that it's worth it. Like, this is the thing to work on. And so of like all of the, different projects and activities that I have, I think this stream is yielding the most growth for me, and is teaching me so much. And if you would have said that to me a few years ago, that it would be emotions, I would have been like, what? What? That doesn't make any sense. What about the framework?
Yeah, I can understand.
But so it's really putting some attention and kind of the decision for yourself to invest in a topic like emotions, especially in the workplace, right? Like, not for like your romantic relationships. That's very easy to understand, but like to decide to tackle emotional aspects of your kind of professional realm, just how big that potential is, and then also how it doesn't take a lot to learn how to act differently, is pretty astounding to me. And I think it's because, like, we are doing it with our bodies, and like you kind of instinctively be like, oh yeah, that's gonna work for me, or oh, I hadn't thought of it that way, and just kind of take it into your next day. One thing somebody said to me after the program was finished is like, I feel like I've only scratched the surface. This is just the beginning. Which, on one side, as the one kind of hosting the program, I'm like, well, I was kind of hoping it would be a little bit more than that. And at the same time, like, that's just my ego, right? It is just the surface, and the fact that they are seeing it as a journey that they will go on, and I may be a part of it, or I may not be part of, the future steps, is already like a huge shift, I think, in the way that they see this aspect. And like, that's a win. Like, to me, that is the value.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a sentence you just said. Like, it doesn't take a lot to do things. What does it take, though?
What does it take? Well, when I say it doesn't take a lot, I mean to experiment with something differently in an interaction, either with somebody or the way that you process whatever happened to you. So it takes that thought and like actually doing it, which doesn't necessarily need to take a lot of time. It also takes, I think, the commitment to finish that loop. So you try something, but you have to think about what happened afterwards so that you can carry it on or not. I think just trying things doesn't really work, or it doesn't have the impact that it could. And I think we are so busy. Things are so intertwined. Things are happening all the time. And we don't always kind of bother to close these loops. And it's just like pure chaos, and we kind of forget. That rigor, I guess, like that mindset is what it takes. Which sounds so simple, no, when I say it.
Yeah, it sounds very easy.
It sounds very easy.
All the time.
Yeah, maybe it's like losing weight, you know, it's like, oh, if I don't eat that cookie.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Very impressive. Yeah. How much changes need from us. I wanted to go to emotional processing briefly.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go there with me? You talk about it in one of your sessions, I think, in Emotions at
Mm-hmm.
Work. And there's this, let's say, process that you notice, name, pause, and decide. Can
Mm-hmm.
you tell us what is emotional processing and what are the steps?
Yeah, well, first I want to share why I'm interested in this because it is from a shared experience I have with you. Um, with Greater Than, was it last month? Yeah, it's been a month now, where we had our annual gathering. So almost 20 people in one place for about a week, wanting to do lots of things. We're also living together, cooking together, cleaning together. Like there's just a lot going on. And one of the reflections is like there was not enough time for processing. Like speaking of that loop, right? It's like the thing is launched, but we're not like going like picking it up. So it's just like lots of things are being launched. And then yeah, nothing really goes away, so it just accumulates. I think that was our experience at the gathering. And we are all frantically trying to find our own ways of processing. In small groups, taking time to yourself. I know a lot of us were having like really vivid dreams, and so it's like clearly the body is trying to process. Yeah, and that really started getting me thinking, what kind of mechanisms do we have for processing the emotions that we have at work? Do they really exist in organizational cultures outside of, say, like a retrospective? I think a lot of it happens during drinks or lunches, which being remote nowadays, like this thing is like it's not happening. And so yeah, I have this kind of visual in my head of all of that just accumulating and then getting so heavy because we carry it around. Yeah, and so getting into the practice then of creating space for ourselves to process. So naming, which requires, you know, a bit of time to think about it, finding the right words. Um, Pausing so that we can kind of take some space between what happened and deciding what we want to do about it. Yeah, there are different theories of how that works, but I think in general, like that's kind of the general process of how it's understood to work. And then, yeah, that's my exploration at the moment. It's like, how do we not forget to do that? And do it in ways that things are getting processed regularly. Because it does take time, and our inclination often is to go, go, go.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, how does that happen in the workplace? I do not know at the moment. What is your
Yeah.
angle?
And I understand that these steps that I named at the beginning are this reflection process. So first you're not noticing, so you take a pause so that you even can start thinking about it. You notice that, you try to name it the best way you can. And then, well, you decide what you do with that in a way, in a conscious way, and not just like doing. And then, well, you decided without even realizing that you were
Yeah,
making
yeah.
that decision, right? Yeah. I think, yeah, that's very interesting because there's another overlap there with, I keep bringing up his name because he wrote one of the main papers that I base my research on. It's a researcher called Bernhard Resch, and he wrote about affective oscillations. And his research is based on the Inspiral network, which is like one of the mother networks of Greater Than. So we have quite a bit of that. And And he was talking, or he describes these new collaborative spaces as places of emotional exuberance. So there's a lot of emotions going on in them, and the oscillations have to do with extremes. So I don't remember exactly now the extremes, but let's say that you go from trust in one, and then the pendulum goes to exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
The reflection is that you cannot, or well, you should not try to avoid going to any of the extremes, even if you don't like that much being in one of them. It's important, and well, it's an emotional, well, in this case, it's an affective dynamic. So it happens in a group of people. So it's not really, especially if it's self-organized, you cannot really control it. You can observe it.
Mm-hmm.
And his reflection was, it's important to take a pause and then reflect on, okay, where are we in the pendulum? What's going on right now? What is it that we need so that, we don't get stuck maybe in potential burnout ways of doing, but that we can pendulate back and go back to a place of trust or joy or whatever it is. So that's, I was interested in the emotional processing because it seems to be one of the things that once you open up and let emotions flow, they will happen, they will develop, and then you can. It's an emergent process in a way, and I think the magic of self-organizing is letting that emergent space and seeing what happens and what that takes you. And it's about not controlling, but there's about this reflection, and I think there's a lot of power in there. Of no, we're here. What do we do with this? So that's where I see a parallel with what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's emergent, and because organizations have cycles, some things can be ritualistic.
Yeah.
And actually, it's reminding me that actually I do have some ideas of how processing happens. Like it's encoded in some of rituals that cultures have developed over time. So in Japanese business culture, you might know that like there's this idea of drinking parties, right? You kind of have to go and get drunk, but not too drunk. But there's a specific type of drinking party called the uchiage, and that happens after the project is finished. Everybody who is part of the project goes. I mean, typically it's a drinking party, so it's kind of dinner and a couple of hours of drinking. But this is the moment where you vent. You say everything that you were not saying up until that point. You can say it to your boss or like to your client in a respectful manner, but this is the place where you are kind of allowed to air your grievances, but also build that camaraderie. And you celebrate that it's finished. And after you have this uchiage, you are not allowed to complain about the project anymore. Like, it's finished. It's finished. Like, you have that moment, like, it's kind of comes out of your system, right? And so now that I think about it, you could say that it is a process, it is a mechanism for processing. We get caught up in like how obligatory it is. Like, oh, you have to go drinking with your boss. But that's actually the functional need that it's serving, which is to allow for the group to process what they have experienced in a way that allows the group to recognize the effort, which was probably a lot of effort, and also like then you go on to the next thing. And when I first moved to Europe, like this culture does not, like this specific drinking party does not exist here. And like I really missed it. I also like cannot stand when people keep complaining about a project, because for me it's done. Like it's done.
Yeah.
And I wonder if self-organized environments, we're actually not benefiting from this kind of rituals that these like older organizations, like older types of organizations have established over the years, like for a reason. And like how can we take the good parts of that?
Yeah.
Maybe there's something to be learned from that because it cannot be emergent all the time. It just cannot.
Yeah, this is so interesting because there are, let's say, in the theory that I've researched, they talk a lot about outlets of emotional expression. So these moments are looked at in a critical way because you're not allowed to go out of the feeling rules that say, except for, well, drinking parties or, I don't know, creativity breakfasts or after work drinks, whatever of those. And there you're expected to have also a certain type of behavior and,
Right.
and emotions. But I hadn't thought about the, let's say, positive light of it, which is mechanisms to process emotions that you have at work. And, well, you don't have the space for that till you get to that moment. So yeah, that's a very interesting perspective of looking at these and what is it that we can learn. We have a lot our little rituals, but being all over the world, we have too little of it in order to be able to process, especially when we're in person once a year altogether. Case scenario.
Yeah, and I think it makes us very reactive. And then when there's a need for processing, it's very difficult to be like, oh, let's pause and reflect. Even though we all know it's what we should do, it's very hard. And I think, yeah, this is the power of rituals. I want to give one more example from Japanese culture, which I'm trying to, I feel like I have access to so much wisdom that but it's not linked to kind of my day to day, especially in work. So yeah, this is not a business ritual. It's related to funerals. But there in Japan, there's a timing after the death of when the relatives are supposed to gather, and it's not every year. Like in the early years, it's like first year, second year, third year. But then after a while, you kind of can't be doing it every year, right? Or we would be doing this all the time for everyone that's died, but you also don't want to think about, oh, should we gather this year? And so like there's a jump. The next timing is the 7th year. And I don't remember when the next one was, but it's been designed so that in the early years you do get together more frequently, but then you're kind of allowed to not have to gather so that when you do gather for the 7th year, it's more meaningful, and also there's no like negotiation involved. And I think this is the beauty of the ritual, is like, you know, it's the 7th year, everybody makes the effort to be there, and like on the 6th year you don't have to think like who's gonna, you know, organize the party. Like it's already designed. And I think there are, yeah, a lot of things, you know, this is just an example from my culture. But I think the beauty of then being an international organization is like we can learn from many of our cultures and kind of start to bring that into the way that we organize ourselves. And I think there's a lot of creativity and, yeah, just that wisdom that maybe we haven't tapped into enough. We don't have to make everything up, especially in reaction to our needs at that time.
Yeah, what a great way or place to leave the conversation, something to explore or jam in an upcoming call about rituals and emotional processing, and what are the examples out there in self-organizing, or what are the possibilities that we can design or learn from in our cultures, as you were saying. Thank you so much, Tomomi, for your time.
Thank you, Alicia, so much.
And yeah, hopefully for a next one sometime.
Yeah, and thank you, whoever is still listening to our podcast.
Yes, thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the conversation with Tomomi. in the end, we were a bit more abstract than we intended. We ended up saying, if, let's say, the best piece of advice or practice, advice it's not, but practice that you can get out of a conversation is, go and reflect. This feels a bit frustrating. So yeah, we were both also a bit frustrated about that, but also wondering what it means. Still, I don't think that's the most practical takeaway that was in our conversation. And the thing I did want to add to this point about reflecting in the collective and then making sense of things is that it feels more abstract, because I think that often we're not doing this right, that we reflect, but then those reflections do not find their way back into our practices or into how we feel. So maybe there's something there about some feedback loops being properly integrated, and so having that these reflections feel more energizing, which I think they often do, but many times yet I'm aware that they don't. Then I think a very good takeaway are the rituals as a way of emotional processing, and it's something I'm definitely be having a look at rituals in the organizational context. And yeah, I think this opened, it gave me again openness to have a look at these, what I mentioned, where outlets of emotional expression, and those are described as spaces in which emotions are instrumentalized in organizations. And it's a critique, but I also take it as one of the, maybe the, let's say, as you do research, or the type of research that I'm doing, you get very used to having a look at the critique side of things. And then it's difficult sometimes to work with what is there. Apart, I think I'm constructive, and I want to think I'm not always critiquing, but I think that this conversation with Tomomi gave me openness again about that, and having a look at what can we learn as well from these organizations that have been around for a very long time and that have certain rituals in place. So yeah, I think that's a very interesting point to have a look at. And yeah, and then Tomomi shared some learnings from the emotions at work. So about doing this reflective work, this peeling onions with a group, it gives you choice because it helps you see a new perspective of having a look at an event or a relationship. Then there was something as well about the reminder while you're in peers that you start seeing and experimenting things differently when you deal with emotions. You integrate them more in your daily life in the organizational setting we're talking about now, that it's worth it. And we know, but it's good to be reminded and have a shared sense that it's worth it. Then there was this element of coherence between the three elements that she described about the model she's been using. I'll link it in the notes. So language, body, and emotions, the intersection between those three, there needs to be coherence amongst those three areas. And then there's something also about how powerful it is, a word, and also having the difficulty of not being able to describe why and how it is, but once you are there in that space, you really feel it. And that's, I think, something that makes, at least it makes me feel very alive. And that's something I just love about this. And then another takeaway with it doesn't take a lot, she was saying, doesn't take a lot to do things differently. So it's mainly about changing or understanding something differently and then doing an action differently. Yeah, so that's what it takes, and then incorporate a reflection in the end. So yes, we end up with reflections here. I would definitely like to engage in a next call with Tomomi and seeing how we can land this in a more practical way. Still, I learned definitely quite a bit in this conversation with her, and I hope you did that too. See you in the next episode, and thank you for watching and listening.